Hi everyone, my name is David Carneiro. I'm from the Polytechnic of Porto. I'm a researcher and a professor in the area of something between artificial intelligence and data science. And in this model, we are going to address how to teach through games, especially around these topics, but not only. We have organized this model into four main submodules, if you want to call them so. I will be delivering the first two, in which are dedicated to defining what is gamification, some basic concepts, some taxonomy, and then how to implement, how to specify a gamified environment in practice. And then the second two will be delivered by my colleague Fabio afterwards, dedicated to the issues of measuring progress in gamification tasks and providing real-time feedback for students, which is very important. And the later one on how to develop learning resources and support material for this kind of activities for our students. So this is very briefly the main outline of these modules. The first module, so it's about what is gamification, how to define it, how to characterize a gamified environment and gamification tasks, and then also very important, how to characterize, how to get to know our students, or we can call them players in this case, how to get to know them so that we can better adapt and adjust the gamification approaches that we use in practice. So, what is gamification? Of course, you can find a lot of very different definitions for gamification. One thing that I would like to stress is that gamification is not necessarily the use of games, and you might even have a gamification environment without an actual game or a traditional game in that sense. So the important thing is to use game mechanics, game dynamics, game elements in non-game environments, and in our case, in the case of this project, for the purpose of education, but it also is not limited to education. So the idea is that you might be learning, you might not be playing an actual game, but you might be dealing with some game elements while you are playing. While you are learning, so that learning becomes more or less like playing in some sense. Two very important issues here are those of game mechanics and game dynamics, and we will be talking about them throughout the whole module, so we should distinguish between them. So the game mechanics are all the elements that in somehow restrict what the user can do, that provide some structure, that provide some limitations, and in that sense that also guide the user or the player towards what we want them to achieve. Some examples would be like the physics, the rules in a given game. So the user or the player is subject to these rules. He cannot, I don't know, if it's a realistic game, he cannot fly, for instance. So that would be an example of game mechanics. Then there are a lot of other examples, of course, depending on what you are using, what you are doing. So points, leaderboards, progress, accomplishments, whatever. So these kind of things that somehow limit what you can do and what the student can do. Game dynamics, on the other hand, have more to do with the behaviors, the feelings that you want to cause on the student. Sometimes you might want to stress them, sometimes you might want to make them feel happy or envy or these kind of things. They might be desirable. So all of these things that the student or the player will feel are the so-called game dynamics. You can achieve them, of course, in very different ways, by promoting cooperation, by promoting competition, by promoting envy, by promoting stress, through time induced stress, for instance. So there are a lot of different ways that you can try to achieve these things. The main goal, as always, is to try to keep students motivated and engaged. So this would be the two main concepts to distinguish. The good things about gamification, which you will generally find in the literature, they are not only good for students, I would say, even for teachers, when we are using, if we are doing it properly, a gamified approach. We generally have to specify our tasks better because we have to actually implement something afterwards. So we usually need to make our goals easier to follow. We usually have to break them down in sub goals, if you want, and in a sequence, because usually we want to have some progress dynamics. So instead of just giving them a very general task, we will have to split this task, to have it well defined with steps, with conditions that tell us, okay, he moved from this point to the other. So in that sense, it's also, I would say it's also positive for the teachers. For the students, this is of course also positive. Then usually we also have immediate feedback and progress dynamics, so that the student knows in real time how well he is doing and how far he still has to go to complete a given task. This is very important, especially when we are more or less in a stage in which we are moving from traditional personal education to an online one, in which the contact with the teacher is probably not as frequent as it used to be. So to have these mechanisms in which the students can have feedback in real time is very important. Gamification also values past accomplishments. Usually when we are learning, and I still remember it when I was at school, I would tend to focus only on the current challenge. So I might have been studying for a lot of years and accomplished a lot of goals, but my only stress would be the next one. So I would tend to forget probably how far I've come. The use of gamification, especially through badges, through your profile in which you can see all the achievements that you have already done, it might be important to boost the students' confidence, because they know they have their own trophies, they have their own badges, to let them remember all the challenges that they have already overcome. Then maybe now it's just one more that they will eventually also overcome. It also favors competition or cooperation, whatever you want to do, but essentially the connection with peers. So this connection can be done through very different mechanisms, but I think this would also be seen as an advantage, as many of the students have issues sometimes with group work, with cooperation and so on, and this is a way to foster it and to do it generally in a positive environment. And then it promotes autonomy, mastery, purpose, social interaction, and so on. So if you look at the literature, and by the way, there is in the resources section you can find a document with a lot of references that most of them were used to put together this module. They are organized by sections. Some of them are repeated because we felt that they belonged in more than one section, but you will find a lot of relevant references if you want to read into some of these topics a little bit more. So gamification in education specifically, it has to do with the use of these game elements in learning environments, so with the purpose of students learning something. The main goals are, on one hand, to motivate students, to keep them more engaged. So instead of doing some boring task, they are learning while doing some joyful task, something that they are happy with. And this joy becomes part of this learning experience. So the idea is that they are not learning just because they have to, but because they are having fun doing it, because they are motivated to do it. It tends to promote some behaviors that are desired in students, so the focus especially, so this commitment, the autonomy, the proactivity, class attendance as well, so they probably will be more likely to attend classes if they are fun, if they are playing some game, or at least feel like they are playing some games. And of course, as I said, gamification is not necessarily the same as using games, or even if they are educational games. Okay, I have some examples in the following slides. As I said, so Duolingo, probably everyone knows Duolingo. It's an example. Like, you wouldn't say that you are actually playing a game, because you are not. You are learning a language and helping other people learning a language, but still you have a lot of elements here that you would consider game elements. So you have badges, you have a notion of progress, you have accomplishments. So here someone moves to the gold league. You have probably experience points and scores and this kind of stuff. So it's actually like, it feels like a game, although you are studying, you are learning. There are many other examples like these nowadays. Code Academy would be one such example. So in this case, for learning programming, once again, you have progress towards a very specific task. In this case, learning fundamentals JavaScript. You have your badges, so your past accomplishments. You have some statistics, like you are on a 10-day streak. You have certain points and so on. So all of these are examples of elements that can be used, and Khan Academy also very similar. So you have your experience points, you have a notion of progress towards specific skills that you are learning. So once again, these are just a few examples. A lot of these things can be found online nowadays, and once again, as I said, they are not actual games. They are serious tasks with some game elements introduced into it so that students can generally feel more motivated. So this was the introduction to some examples of gamification and what it is. Now let's look into a little bit more detail and see how we can characterize a gamification environment. There are several ways in which we can do it. This is just one, but one that we feel is the best one, or at least one of the best ones to do it. This is a taxonomy. You have the reference here for the source, and it's once again it's also on the document that will be on the resources. And in this taxonomy, the game elements that you can use are divided into 5 main dimensions, which we are going to look at individually now in the following slides. So by the way, the idea of this, and we are going to go into a little bit more detail in the rest of the module, but the idea is that you can look at this almost as a menu. So of the things that you want to pick, you can cherry pick from this one. Probably won't never use all of these things because they would be a lot. But the idea is that you can cherry pick from these game elements to create your own gamified environment. Okay, so you want to use these and these and these, depending, for instance, on the type of students that you have or on your learning task, which we will also cover in a little bit. So the performance dimension, this includes the game elements that are related with measuring progress or performance of your students or your players. So this might include things like a progress bar, like the level that they are currently on. So they can go through several levels, and right now they are here, so they know how far they have come and where they still have to go. It can include points, various statistics, and various types of acknowledgements as well. So badges or medals or trophies would be examples of that. A teacher writing or posting something on Moodle, for instance, with the top 3 teams would also be a way to acknowledge the performance of students. So a lot of very different things. If you look at the slides carefully, then you will have these types of examples. Then the ecological dimension has to do with the game environment. So once again, it has to do with rules, with restrictions that you might have that will influence the way that the game is played, if you want to put it this way. Rarity is a very important, not always mentioned, but a very important game element. So the idea is if you have scarcity or rarity in some items, students will want to compete for it. So for instance, let's say that you have a very specific badge that you only attribute to the top 3 teams, top 5 students, whatever, that would be a rarity. So students will want to compete to earn that badge that a few others will have. Envy also plays an important role here. Chance is also very interesting. Also, once again, also not very frequently used or frequently talked about, but to have random events. For instance, let's say that a question or a quest pops up randomly at some time. I would say that chance and time pressure are 2 very important ways to wake up your students, because especially if they are, I would say, like the best students, the one that do everything very well and very quickly, maybe they get bored at the middle of it, or maybe they have a sense that I don't have to make an effort right now because I know that I can do this task in due time, so I'm going to relax, and maybe they don't feel so engaged in the task. If you have this kind of random events that can pop at any time, it will wake them up. It will probably make them do some research, do something that they were not counting on, and it will put them moving. So these kind of things are also important to have scattered around your tasks. And of course, time pressure is, I would say, it's also very important. Otherwise, students will just relax and leave everything for the last moment. Then the social dimension here is where you can foster social interactions between your students if you want to do so, and of course there are many different ways of doing it. Having a leaderboard, for instance, might be one of the ways, and probably is one of the most common ways to do it. So a leaderboard in which all of your students or your teams show up, and they are ranked by some performance metrics. So this will somehow cause some social pressure, some peer pressure, so because they will compare each other, and usually they will want to be on the top part of that leaderboard. In some cases, of course, students, it might have a negative effect because students might not like the comparison, might not like to see their performance appear before the whole class. So of course This depends a lot on the type of students that you have, and that's what we are going to analyze in a while. These can also include competition or cooperation, or maybe the two of them. We will also see an example in a few slides in which we can merge competition and cooperation, so that we try to embrace all our students in all their different learning styles and behavior towards games. Then you have, so this was the social dimension, then you have the personal dimension. So the social dimension is how the players interact with each other. The personal dimension is how each player interacts with himself or with herself, if you want to put it that way. So this might include sensations that the users have, so especially if you are using an actual game with an environment, you might be able to cause different sensations to the students. If you have puzzles that they need to solve, you can appeal to this sense of misery, the sense of wanting to solve puzzles that students might want to have. The issue of novelty, once again, is very important. The randomness, the unpredicted elements that pop up at any time. So the idea of these things is that we might be able to appeal to the things that provide some intrinsic motivation to the students. Okay, of course, once again, this depends a lot on the type of students that we have. Then the fictional elements, these have to do with the way you present the task. So you can, I would say in a very traditional way, you can give your students a given task. Let's say that you have a programming task, you just tell them you have to do this, okay, and they look at the description of the task and they do it. And you can do the exact same thing in terms of learning, but by providing them with a story around it. So maybe now they are not just programming, but they are helping their hero solve a specific issue, and the hero will have to solve several specific issues in a row. So I don't know, maybe it's programming a spacecraft that's going to go into space, and that is only going to happen if the student is able to successfully solve all these challenges. So it's exactly the same. The student will be writing code at the end of the day, but he will do it in a very different framework. So he will feel like he will be playing a game, and this only depends on the way you create this narrative around it. A very simple example that I frequently use, that I usually give, is that, for instance, sometimes it's just about changing the language. So you can give your students a given task, and they will be solving it in groups, and each group has a number. That's a way of identifying them. Or you can tell them that instead of doing some practical work, they will be participating in a competition. Instead of groups, they have teams, and instead of group numbers, they have team names, for instance, and they pick their own names. So they will be picking like battle names and so on, which will be very cool. And once again, they will be doing the exact same task, but they will be doing it in a very different way in terms of the narrative that you build. And sometimes these are very simple things that you change that completely change the way they feel the task that they are doing. So this would be very quickly a way of characterizing these game elements. We will go back to them in a while. Then the other important part of this first sub-module is to characterize students. And this is a very challenging task, of course. And here we try to overview some objective ways of doing it. Why is this important? You will always have to make a decision between having just a generic design that would apply to any type of student, or if you know your students, maybe you can personalize what you are doing. So let's say that most of your students are very social students and they don't have any problems with group work and so on. Maybe you want to take profit of that, or maybe the other way around. Maybe they are not social students at all. They don't know each other. Maybe they would prefer to work alone by themselves, and maybe you actually want to improve that on them. So you will want to force them to have social game elements. So these are just examples. Of course, then you go into things like personality, like their player types, which we are going to see in a while, which are once again very complex elements. But I think that if we have a notion, a more or less objective notion of how our students are, we will try to, on the one hand, we will try to adapt to them, and on the other hand, at least I think it's important if we don't do things that would be negative for them. Okay, so or that we know that there are a few students, so the majority will We like our gamified task, but there are two or three that do not fit in this, so that we can adapt to them. So one very important aspect is that of personality. Of course, there are many different personality tests with very different degrees of complexity. Probably one of the most used is the Big Five personality traits. There is in the following links, in the following slides, I have some links for these tests that we have here, so that you see that they can actually be used online. For instance, it's very simple for your students to fill them, and you have access to this kind of information about them. So the Big Five test characterizes the personality of someone into 5 different axes. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this because we don't have the time. Once again, you have the sources for this, but essentially this will tell you if your students, for instance, in terms of openness, if they like very creative work, if they like to have very different things, or if they would prefer to do the same thing every time following the same structure, for instance. Whether they like schedules, whether they don't like schedules and are completely unorganized, whether they are very extroverted, so they like to talk with a lot of people, they like to be the center of attentions, or whether they prefer to sit alone on the corner, and so on. So you have these 5 different dimensions, and probably you will, in the same class, you will have students with very different personalities, and that, of course, is the main challenge. But as I said, I think it's important if we know them, especially to spot the ones that are the outliers, ones that are very different from the rest, so that we do not leave them behind when we prepare these kind of things. Then there are other types of characterizing our students that are more specific to gamification. In this case, I put 2 questionnaires here, one for the Berthold player taxonomy and the other, which is the gamification user types exit. They are more or less similar, although they have different numbers of dimensions, but essentially they have to do with whether students prefer to explore the environment or to explore the social interactions, whether they prefer to do it alone or with company, and so on. So with this, you will have different player types, if you want to call it that. And once again, based on this, you can develop different gamification experiences that appeal to the type of players that they have. And this is also, I didn't talk about it, but it's also important when you are creating the teams or creating the work group. So maybe you want to have these different types of players in the same group. So instead of leaving the students to create their own groups, in which they tend to build like homogeneous groups. So if I am a socializer, I will try to surrender myself with socializers as well. So, and maybe what we want is to have a mix of different player types in the same team, so that they also complement each other. So it's a way of doing it. So this was about characterizing the environment, the gamification, and the students. Now let's see how we can start to specify the actual gamification environment. So now that we already know the building blocks that we have, the game elements, let's see how we can specify a gamification environment specifically for education. So we propose here in a very informal way a group of 6 tasks or 6 steps, if you want, that you can follow. The first one is probably the more traditional one, so you would already have to do this, you would already have to define your learning task. Maybe here you have to define it in a more fine-grained way, as I said, but and that is positive in my opinion, but still we have to decide what are the expected learning outcomes. So let's say that we are talking about artificial intelligence, teaching artificial intelligence. Do we only need to teach, or do all students only need to know about very abstract or theoretical concepts? So just know the concepts, or do they actually have to implement something, to put something up and running? If they have to put something up and running, do they have to write actual codes, for instance in Python, or is it enough for them to draw the processes, and maybe we are using some tool like 9? Are we doing anything in between? So these kind of things are very important. Also, how will these outcomes be achieved? So are we going to be discussing them with students, presenting them, or are students doing them on their own, maybe based on some project, or once again some mixture of these? And also very important, what is the expected level of demand or challenge? So how far do we have to go? How complex will the task be? After characterizing our task, we will also have to know our students, and this is what we were discussing mostly in the previous part. So what is their prior knowledge? Are they familiar with artificial intelligence already or not? Do they have a programming background, for instance, even if they don't have an AI background? Do they have some mathematical foundations, and do they need them? So these kind of things are very important, so that then we can specify our task afterwards, and also whether they are a homogeneous or heterogeneous group. So are they all on the same level, or some of them are more advanced than others? This is very important so that we can keep everyone motivated. Here, one very important aspect is to have a balance between the challenges that we provide them and the skills the students have. And of course, this is much more difficult when students have different types of skills, and there the group work might help if we have tasks that can have different subtasks in them with different levels of complexity. And of course, here the idea is that we, as students progress, so as their skills increase, we also increase the level of challenge that we give them. If we are able to do that in a balanced way, students will be motivated throughout the whole time. Of course, you can read a lot about this. This is called theory of flow, or flow theory, which is very interesting. And then this could be further specified. We want to keep students in this, I would say, top right corner, in which they feel aroused or in control and confident and in the flow. Anything outside of this is not so positive, okay? And the feelings of students can range from between stress and sadness and lack of confidence and so on. So we do not want that. Once again, it's very important that we monitor our students, that we know how they are doing and how they are feeling, because for the same gamification task we might have very different results in this regard. Two very important aspects must be balanced. So not only challenges and skills, which we were talking about, but also learning and fun. Okay, so we must keep in mind that we are doing this with the purpose of the students learning something and not only having fun, but rather also having fun. Of course, there will be students that would be okay with having just fun and no learning at all, but not all students. There will also be students in which, if we provide them with too much fun, they will feel like they are not actually learning, they are just there playing. And if they are good students, they know that they were there to learn and not only to play. So it's very important to balance this. Actually, in one of the papers of the resources, there are some very nice findings that even teachers are afraid that when they are creating a gamified experience for the students, they are afraid that they might be providing them with too much fun and not so much learning. So it's very important that we balance this. And of course, in order to do this, we need to be able to measure the progress of the students, to know how far they have come and how far they still have to go in order to meet the learning goals that we specified. If we don't have a way to do that, or if the goals are not very clearly defined, it's very difficult to know whether we are balancing this learning with the fun. So once we have done all of this, we can start to choose the game elements that we want to use. And in this case, the game elements are the ones that we discussed in the first part in the gamification taxonomy. It's very important that we are realistic. So we might be picking game elements that we then are not able to implement, either because we don't have access to the necessary tool, or maybe because we are not able to implement them if we are talking about actually developing a very specific tool for gamification. But of course, the easiest thing is to use existing tools, and Fabio in the next part will discuss it. But then we are limited by the tools that we use. So once again, we need to be realistic about it. We need to know what we want to do and the tools that we are going to use, so that we can actually do what we want to do. Also, these game elements should, if possible, appeal to all students. So let's say that we pick competition as one of the game elements, and none of our students like competition. So we will probably not have a lot of success in what we are doing. Also, they should be aligned with the learning goals that we have defined in the first step. So for instance, let's say that you wanted to use progression, or a notion of progression, like a progress bar, but your task is so small, so simple, that you cannot split it into several parts to provide progression. So it doesn't make sense to use progression probably in this case. Also very important, these game elements should contribute to a spread out reward system. So the idea is that you should not provide a very big reward, for instance, at the end of the task. You should be able to split your task into smaller tasks, and you provide this feedback, this reward in a separated way throughout time, so that students feel motivated to work continuously and they feel that they are progressing towards something. And also very important, it should not be more complex for the students to do a task using gamification than it would be to do in a traditional way. Probably for the teacher it will be more difficult, so you will have more work in setting up something like this. But it's usually positive, it's usually better for the students. And one important finding also in one of the papers that you have available is that it appears that teachers tend to cooperate also when creating gamified environments. So instead of me going through all the work of learning how to use these tools and how to do gamification and so on, I'm going to do it together with other teachers that I have in my group, and maybe all of us are learning together and all of us can take profit of each other's work. And that's also a very positive finding. So it's also something to consider. So the next step is to actually define the gamification workflow, and here we will go into a little bit of more detail. So the gamification workflow, very quickly, is we'll represent it here as this cycle, if you want. So you have your student and you have your learning task, and the student is performing this learning task. And then the learning task will generate learning events. So the student did something while doing this task that generated this learning event. This learning event will affect one of the game elements that you chose, in some way. And when it is affected, you are able to measure it and to provide feedback to the student. So the student knows how he is progressing, and he will continue to work on them this way. We will go through this with a very quick and very simple example. So let's say that the task is for your students to train the best possible model to solve a machine learning problem, whatever it is. Let's say that they can submit different models over time. So they have some mechanism in which they can submit the model for evaluation and they get immediate feedback. For instance, I don't know, the accuracy of the model they just submitted. And they are doing this in teams. So they can train their models in teams. From time to time, they submit their models. And let's say that the environment that we are using allows us to evaluate this model automatically. Fabio, in the next part, will use Kaggle as an example of this, a specific example in which students can submit their models for having real-time feedback. There is a time limit for finishing the task, and there is a limited number of submissions that they can make. So the idea is that they do not spam the submission system. So let's say that by the way, this is an example of scarcity. So maybe each student or each team can only make 10 submissions in total. The students will actually have to make an effort so that each submission counts. And there is the public available leaderboard, so the social pressure, peer pressure. So let's say that we have the following elements and the following logic very quickly. So you want to attribute a badge to students when they join a team, when they first make a submission, and also a badge to the winning team. There is a public leaderboard in which the best model of each team is displayed, and then there is a private leaderboard as well, so within the team, that is based on the quality of each model submitted by the member of the team. So here you have competition with other teams and competitions within the team itself, within the actual members of the team. As I said, there is a time limit, there is a limit number of models that they can submit. Another badge for a streak of 5 consecutive improving models, for instance. Individual students and not teams, receive a number of points that is proportional to the accuracy of each submission that they do. And you, as a form of acknowledgement, you want to publicly congratulate students on the top 5, for instance. Okay. So let's say that you wanted to do all of this. So how do you start to get this done? So I think one important way to start to specify this is to use a decision table, in which in the rows you have the learning events that you decided to monitor, and in the columns you have the affected gamification elements, which are the ones that were taken from that wheel, from the gamification taxonomy that we saw earlier. So when you do this, let's take the second event. For instance, student makes a submission. So a specific student in a team, you just trained a model and he wants to submit it for evaluation, for automatic evaluation by the, let's say, by Kaggle. So this will have an effect on the gamification elements that you chose, and this table only serves for you to remember the things that you are going to have to do if you want to implement this. So if you made a submission, you might have to give him a badge, so it might have an effect on that. For instance, in the case of a streak, he is awarded points because we said that he will receive a number of points that are proportional to the accuracy of the model. There is no acknowledgement. There is time pressure always, of course, because there is a time pressure for completing this task. There is social pressure as well, partially because the result might happen to appear on the leaderboard if it is the best result of the team. There is competition, as I said, within the team and with the other elements of the class, and there is also rarity because of the limit on the number of submissions that the students can have. So in this case, which is, I would say, relatively simple, but already not so simple, we would be using 3 different dimensions. So the performance dimension, the ecological dimension, which has to do with the environment, and the social dimension as well. So, as I said, maybe a simplification, but the idea is just to give an idea of the process. Then another important aspect when we are implementing this, and we are still in step 4, as I said, we were going to go into a little bit more detail here, is to keep students motivated. Motivation is very important, of course, and there are different types of motivation. 2 of them are the intrinsic and the extrinsic motivation, and usually we want to appeal to the intrinsic motivation. So students should be doing a task because they are enjoying, because they really want to do it, because they value what they are learning or whatever, and not because, for instance, they will fail if they don't do it. So that's a bad example of motivation. We should so appeal to the intrinsic motivation. The issue of expected value is very important here. So if we are able, and we saw that in module 2, if we are able to convince people, and in this case our students, that what they are learning, in this case artificial intelligence, has a lot of value and it will have a lot of significant impact in the future of society and so on, they will probably give value to this task, and they will be intrinsically motivated to do it because they feel that they will be learning and contributing to something that will be very important in the future. If we fail to do that, they might probably only look at the mathematics of it or at the boring parts of it, and they won't acknowledge value in it. So they will probably not be very well motivated to do it. So I think it's important that we start these type of processes by letting them know, and it's very easy to give them some examples of the importance and the relevance, and actually how fun as well artificial intelligence can be. And then once they perceive the value, it will be easier to keep them motivated and engaged. When we talk about motivation, once again, there are a lot of frameworks that you can use. In our opinion, one of the best ones is the Octalysis framework. And here the main idea is that this is human-focused design. So we are not machines. We are not motivated because we were programmed to do it. We are motivated by our feelings, by a lot of different reasons that can appeal to us. And the Octalysis framework summarizes 8, probably the most important 8 dimensions in which we can be motivated. Of course, different people will be motivated in different ways. For instance, taking the example of the epic meaning and calling, some people will be motivated because they feel that they are participating in a very big story. So, for instance, the example that I gave earlier about programming the components of a spacecraft, for instance, that would appeal to a lot of people, especially the ones that like to play games. Then, of course, there are some might be motivated by curiosity, some might be motivated by not losing something that they have already earned, or a combination, or these kind of things. Here, I think the important part is for us to get familiar with all of these dimensions so that we can maybe try to have a little bit of each or a little bit of some of them in the things that we do. So once again, this is another topic for future reading if you are interested in it, and I think it's a very important one. So moving on to step 5, this is essentially the step that will be covered by Fabio in a while. So it is to actually launch. So we have specified everything. We know our students, we know our task, we know what we want to do. So let's start to do it. We have already implemented it, so let's start to do it. So Fabio will guide you through an example with Kaggle in the next part on how to do it. And the final step and also the final slide of this module would be to monitor and to learn something. And this is also very important because usually, and it was the case with me and it's the case with a lot of people, when we are using gamification, we are usually changing from something that we used to do in a more traditional way. It will not always be positive, and you can find also a lot of students of gamification experiences in which the results are at best mixed. Sometimes I would say it's bad or poor results, and we don't want to have this kind of experiences with our students. So we want to make them feel motivated. We want to make it a positive experience for them. I think it's even ethical that we should not play with gamification. So maybe it's better if we start simple and then from one year to the other we start introducing more and more game elements. I think it's very important to monitor, so to know, are our students interacting with the system? Are they interacting with each other? Are they submitting models if that is the case? How frequently? Are there teams that didn't do anything yet, so maybe we can reach out to them? A lot of different things. Are they motivated? For instance, at the end of each semester, I usually use the one in the classes in which I am using some kind of gamification approach. I use the academic motivation scale to know what motivated them. So were they motivated by the actual approach that I was using and the game elements that I was using, and or not, and in which way? And this also allows you to know whether they value the contents that you are teaching them. So it's a very complete tool. It's also a questionnaire. It's very easy to administer. I use it with Google Forms. In an anonymous way, of course. They just answer and I get a more or less clear picture of what motivated them. So there are a lot of things that you can do here, and it also depends, of course, on the tool that you are using, whether you can get these indicators or not, but still we should not do it at the end. So we should do it from the day that we start to have these activities with our students so that we can monitor them also more or less in real time. So we will have questionnaires, we can use dashboards, we can use a lot of different things depending on the tool. And the goal, of course, is to make sure that students are learning, also having fun, but not only having fun, and that they are motivated while they are doing it. If not, if we are monitoring them in real time, we might be able to still do something in the middle of it. And at the end, of course, there might be lessons that we learn for the next year and for the next iterations. So concerning this model, this was it. So Fabio in the next model will guide you in a more practical way through how we can actually implement these kind of things using some freely available tools. Okay, so thank you for your attention and have fun in the next model.
Hi everyone, we are here to present the third part of Model 4, which is learning by game design. So the objectives for this part are how to develop digital contents and resources to support student learning. And for that we will talk about a little bit about gamification, what is gamification and how it can be applied, and how to design and think about game dynamics to promote learning activities and learning in students. And we selected a couple of practical examples to demonstrate and to show potential how to implement these strategies in a real-world scenario. So, before all, we have to remember the notion of gamification. Okay, gamification is the application of game-based theory into serious problems, or in this case, in the area of learning. Of course, that we cannot make learning a pure game. Okay, we have to adapt and to produce learning contents that are adapted to gamification. And of course, we can make that more customized, or adhere to standard gamification platform and try to adapt with minimal effort our course curriculum to gamification design. Nevertheless, we have to think about gamification elements to the course curriculum, to the support materials, and how to integrate them into everyday activities, and how they will complement and steer students in their learning objectives. So, it's important to remember that gamification is a term that was coined by Nick Billing in 2002. It's not the youngest term ever, but its application is still in a young development phase. So the basic gamification elements that we know and we see in most platforms are the most basic ones, like points, levels, achievements, but gamification can have areas of influence. Okay, so we can use gamification to boost performance, in which we will use maybe elements such as ranking, competition, forums, cooperation between students. But we have also the other aspects, like the fictional, making the contents more pleasing, more game-like, more like a computer game. We have ecological, societal, and personal gamification design. These contents have already been covered in the last two parts, in the initial two parts of this presentation, but it's nevertheless good to remember. So, we have to fit gamification tasks or digital games in the learning outcomes or the learning objectives of our task. So it's important to define a good learning task, know more or less how and characterize our students, users, or players, and select carefully which game elements we are going to implement. We have already seen in the previous two presentations that the characteristics of the group is very important. Gamification is not can be targeted to the individual, and we would have to gather inputs from its learning methods or its preferred learning methods. But as a group, interactions can become quite complex, especially in a heterogeneous group with different preferences. So we have to take that into account and to add enough game elements to make sure that the learning outcomes and the desired objectives are targeted. So, and we have, apart from the gamification elements, we have to also define what is the gamification workflow. How do we want to steer the learning, and how do we want to influence user behavior throughout the learning course? So of course this may not be let's say fixed, okay, defined at the beginning and it cannot be changed. It's not like that, okay. Of course we can throughout the course adapt and respond to how the users are using our gamification elements and make small adjustments if necessary, but the general activity workflow is this one, okay. I would like to stress that this is only for the teacher, okay. This is what the teacher needs to do. Of course, when he has all these elements gathered, the next thing is really to launch the gamification experience and to implement it, and to give it to the students. So, in terms of gamification per se, we can think of gamification implementation in at least three ways, okay? Manual, in which we will create all the course content, we will create all the gamification elements. This can be done with a sheet of paper, with a manual definition, or a computer program, or a computer platform, but in which we will customize and create everything from scratch. Okay, there are a couple of implementations that choose this route. It's the most customizable, the most adaptable to our learning outcomes, and the one with less compromises, in which that we will implement what we envisioned and what we want for the students. So if we want points, we'll establish a rule system and manual attribute points for the users. Of course, this may not be practical, as many teachers are not particularly tech savvy or have the time and effort to create such laborious tasks. Okay, so one other easy way to advance further is to use complementary platforms, or take a learning management system like Moodle, like edX, or other massive learning or other learning platforms, and explore gamification plugins, and to bring those plugins into the platform and configure our courses iteratively with gamification elements, and adjust and see the performance over time, and basically motivate students with these gamification elements. The last one is perhaps the most simple, which is use a dedicated gamification platform. Here we will have maybe perhaps a restricted set of gamification elements in a set way, and we can of course build our learning course or support material inside that platform. Generally, what you have to do is to prepare the support materials for that platform. Okay, so it's like building the course inside the gamification platform. So it can also be used, but is less less customizable. If we want to see manual implementation of gamification, we can see them in the Minecraft lessons. Okay, they have a lot of different examples, from teaching mathematics, psychology, informatics, AI, inside the game of Minecraft. So they have course materials that are specifically prepared for this platform. They have code implemented for this platform. They have samples. They have algorithms in Scratch, in Python, already not totally done, but for the student to use inside the platform, and then they can explore the concepts through the game itself. So it's a very rich experience in terms of gamification, but it's restricted to the Minecraft environment. So on the other hand, we have the Robocode, which is at the bottom right, which is a competition in which each player presents a program for a set of robots, or for a robot, and then they all compete in an arena for determine game goals. This can be to just survive, to be the longest survivor, or to develop social interactions between a group of robots to try to form a team and do battle that way. This can be used to explore a number of artificial intelligence algorithms, like agents and other topics, and this platform will issue a ranking system at the end of each round, saying with a lot of statistics that our implementation or algorithm was able to produce, and we can use that as a gamification element to distinguish users, to rank them, to attribute points, and to create leagues and levels as they will progress, as they evolve their algorithms throughout a learning course, for example. So on the other hand, we have the gamification, the learning management systems, which are traditional and used specifically in higher education, and more and more at lower levels of education, which is like learning systems such as Moodle, OpenEdX, and Blackboard, and other systems. So these ones are classic learning management systems. Okay, they have no gamification implementation whatsoever, but we can take a course that we have already prepared for, let's say, the Moodle, which has the presentations, challenges, exercise, tests, practical exercises, and configure a number of gamification plugins available for the Moodle platform, and add gamification elements such as levels, achievements, points, and other developments. So in the case of Moodle, okay, we have a dedicated page for gamification plugins in which we can choose from a wide variety of the most well-known gamification elements. So it's very easy. It's very easy to configure. It's needed to install these plugins on the administrative platform. So we will need an administration or a platform administrator to install these plugins. Once installed, a teacher can quickly add any of these plugins and configure them to its course. Okay, so it doesn't require to totally change support materials or course design, but helps to build upon that, and like I said previously, we can iteratively build a new support material more tailored to these dynamics. So I want to discuss a little about some examples. So the most basic one is the Level Up XP gamification. So this plugin will add the basic elements of gamification like points, levels, badge, and achievements. We can even create our own rules. Okay, we can define what points to give a student for some actions. Okay, and these actions can be open course material, read a PDF, discuss in a forum, cooperate with others through discussions, and we can give points for its interaction in this way. So the teacher can define the rules, and by the usage of the platform, the student will acquire points when any of these rules can be triggered. So in terms of the taxonomy that was presented in the last two presentations, we can view this plugin as implementing the performance and social aspects of the gamification taxonomy. We can also tailor for competition or collaboration, depending on the set rules and achievements and points that how do we give points, and this will indeed affect the social engagement of students. Okay, if they are engaged in the course, and in the gamification experience, they will adapt their behaviors to acquire more points, and we can, as a teacher, it can promote either competition or collaboration as needed for the best learning outcome. So, if we want to create a more game scenery, we can use a plugin called Trail Format, okay, in which we can present the course as a set of hierarchical steps, and allow students to go on a set path and unlocking content as they go. So this is, of course, according to the taxonomy, more ecological aspects, more fictional and personal aspects. Okay, so this will make the learning seem like a game. We also have another plugin which I would like to present, which is Stash. This plugin will randomly give items when students look for information in some pages. Okay, these items are limited. It's a scarce item, so it may not always be there. So the student has to keep going to and exploring the course to acquire. We can make it a collectible task, and the objective is for the student to spend more time in the learning the course materials and to explore the course that the teacher has designed for you. So I can give a quick demonstration. I'd like to show you the Moodle plugin page. Okay, we can see here that we have a lot of plugins, more than I presented during this presentation. We can see here some of the which I referred. If we open this one, we can see the brief description of what it is. We can even download, okay, and this will download a zip file. So this zip file is what the platform administration needs to install in the Moodle page. So here I can show you a custom Moodle page, okay, which will have some courses available. This can be curricular units of school year. It can be a short learning task. It can be a workshop. It doesn't really matter. After a teacher creates a course, if he wants to ask the platform administration to install new plugins, he just has to go to site administration, plugins, install new plugins, and drop the zip file here and click install. Okay, after the installation, the Moodle platform will update itself, and by default the plugin is available to all courses. Okay, if there is need to restrict the plugin to specific courses, the site administration can also do it. So, and if we go to course material, the courses, we can go here. We can start to see here some gamifications, like the completion of course. We can come here and we can configure all the roles that we need. So we will do this and then over the next presentation. So in terms of automatic platforms, I would like to introduce the Kaggle platform, which is one of the most popular data science competition platforms, in which teachers can quickly configure a competition, a learning competition, so the students can compete in a data science objective. So this platform is built from the ground up to support some elements of gamification, like points, achievements, levels, and rankings. So you can see that the students will need to register in this platform, and they can access public and private competitions. So the teacher can make a private competition and invite students to go there. The specific and custom gamification elements, we can pinpoint that this specific platform implements two types of leaderboards or rankings. a public and a private. Okay, so when a teacher designs a competition, students will have access to a public ranking system, which will rank them according to the outcome of their tasks in the competition, and the teacher will have access to another leaderboard, a private leaderboard, which is usually different data to apply the same algorithms, and to see if the students are trying to learn generic models, or if their model only fits the data that is shown them. So this is a very problematic in data science, which is the concept of overfit, where models are very good, but only with the data that they already have seen, not with new data. And these competitions are traditionally in the field of machine learning, in the field of classification, have some input that we have to classify in some aspect. And the Kaggle competition is basically to provide an environment to give the training materials for the machine learning models, and the results are hidden from the results dataset, which are hidden from the students, are also configured in the platform. And when a student makes a submission, it will rank both in a public and private leaderboards, and the teacher will have access. So this platform also limits the number of submissions per day or per team, and well, of course, we can, and it also allows for students to work in groups and against each other. So it has some interesting dynamics which the teacher can use, specifically when teaching classification problems in AI. So in the Kaggle competition, we can define a private competition. It's free. Everyone can, every teacher can use it. So we can define the name of the competition. It will generate an unique URL for this competition. We can say if it's open for everyone, or a public competition, or just for a select group of people. We can then define all the necessary aspects for this specific competition, which is the settings, the branding, the hosts, how evaluation criteria, how I will evaluate the submissions from students. The platform also has something called sandbox submissions, which means to create or to try for the teacher to try to see if the submissions are correctly interpreted by the Kaggle competition. Then you can see how submissions are stored, and it has also a launch checklist for the teacher to see if it has already configured everything necessary for this competition. So the students will go to the competition, download the trained data, and they can use either Python notebooks inside the Kaggle platform and use normal programming tasks to solve the problems, or they may use machine learning workflow programs such as KNIME, which is here in this example, in which is as a drag and drop style. It can perform different tasks such as read the data, transform the data, apply learning algorithms, and with the learning algorithm trained, it can assess its performance, and it can predict the test data that will be submitted to Kaggle. And in this way, well, students can also change these algorithms very simply with different nodes, which represent different learning algorithms, and see if their learning tasks are improving or decreasing. They can also tweak algorithm parameters to see if it will improve or not its decision. So it's a very useful learning task for classifications in AI. So other options are to use companion notebooks, which are Python notebooks, which can be run directly in the Kaggle platform. It can import machine learning libraries and import files, perform all the necessary activities over these files, and then upload the solutions to the Kaggle platform and rank them. So we may see a little bit about Kaggle. Sorry, let me see here. Okay, so the Kaggle platform, once a student is logged in, or a teacher is this one, it's the same. Okay, we can see our profile. Okay, we can see everything that a profile has, how many competitions I have been in, my medals, my points, my ranking. Well, this will increase as more competitions are made. I can see public competitions displayed here. Okay, these are public competitions which may or may not be have financial prizes or not, but the teacher can also create your own platform. So if I go here, I can create my competition. So I have one not totally done, but I can show here. So this is the example that I was displaying on the slides. So, and okay, we can see that everything is done except for the deadline. Okay, competitions have to have a deadline. So in this case, I have to go here and change the deadline to a new date. So changes. You can see I could launch the competition now, but just for the sake of demonstrating, we can describe the competition and add here all the fundamentals of our competition. We can, in the host separator, configure our competition. So you can say that it's open for everyone or invite only. If the team, if I want teams, if I don't want teams, I just select one. How many submissions I want per day, and of those submissions, how many I will allow the students to mark for private ranking, which they will not know until the end of the competition. So evaluation is how I will evaluate my my competition. I will upload an initial test data set, okay, which it's like a solution file, okay, what I expect the users to submit, and a sample solution, okay. And between those two, I can also from the solution file, I can also divide the solution file in two percentage, which I can say that 50% of the solution file is for the public leaderboard, and another 50% is for the private leaderboard. So the student will submit a submission which answers, which has the sum size of this solution file, and the leaderboards will be assessed with the first 50% part of the dataset, and then the other 50 will be stored in the private leaderboard. So, and I can check if everything is okay with sandbox submissions, okay. While configuring the platform, I can make here some submissions, and we can see if the public and private scoring is going well or not. So if everything is okay, well, then I have to check all the separators. Okay, it will here display minimal rules or a more extensive overview, and okay, I have to provide all the necessary files in the data folder, in the data separator. Okay, in this I will give students some training data sets for them to learn the models, which are based on the same type of data and then I will give test data which is not classified, a test data set which is not classified for the students to configure. So, and in this manner they will have to train, to download the test and the training and test data sets and use machine learning algorithms to provide an answer that they will submit again to Kate. So, general recommendations for the application of gamification. Never forget to promote active learning, or more practically speaking, for promoting activities or for the student to learn autonomously. Focus on micro learning, okay? The more micro tasks, the more gamification elements we can add. Promote social engagement, either by cooperation or competition, either with the rankings or discussions in the forum. Design for both competition and cooperation, of course, and taking consideration student context, how the group learns, and add more gamification elements to suit the group, not necessarily the individual. So this is the presentation for part 3. Hi everyone, so we will continue with the last part of Model 4 presentations. So in this presentation, our goal is to identify and develop real-time feedback mechanisms and identify or develop progress mechanisms for students to work autonomously. So how we can implement gamification dynamics and what we need to look for and to pay attention to ensure the good experiences. So, of course, when we are gamifying any experience, it's usually a good idea to have a framework, a support framework, or something that can guide us through the implementation. So we have already seen Doctile as this framework, so we can also use it as a reference. So these 8 steps are a good indication to what we have to look for like an epic meaning, so something, a goal, and a huge goal for the students to learn, to keep them not motivated, to development accomplishment, to promote feedback, to make students realize of their own abilities, what they are acquiring, leverage things like social influence, envy, friendships in the learning space, deal with strategies that make some events limited or scarce, apply or not pressure and time related goals for our gamification. Think about unpredictables and leave the gamification implementation open for others, to open paths for the students to surprise with their interactions, and deal with loss and avoidance, and how to regain a student that has lost focus, has lost engagement. Okay, we have to have strategies for that as well. So this Octal is a nice example with strategies that we can use for each one of these 8 steps. We also have to remember the self-determination theory developed by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, which basically says that it's better to have intrinsic motivation than extrinsic motivation. So when students are doing something because they really like, they really want to, it's better than being forced to learn or to do something because it will lead to an outcome that they eventually want. So the challenge is to change this mindset to one in which the student really wants to learn despite acquiring something like a certificate or a degree. Okay, the challenge is here. So we want to define gamification experiences that full intrinsic motivation. So this, of course, is not an easy task and may require to bring elements such as challenges and tasks, have more or less social activities which open the space for interactions between students or competitions. It will also lead to philosophical debates, or which is, should we only use positive reinforcements for the students, or can you use negative reinforcements when a student, for instance, does not watch classes, does not download support materials, does not follow classes? So should we take points? Should we add points, for instance? Should we double the point rate when a student that is not has not been to classes suddenly appears, and try to keep him motivated? So these are the kinds of tasks that we need to pay attention to, and this also fits in what is called in the MD model, which is mechanics, dynamics, and emotions. Okay, so the teacher will develop mechanics for the gamification experience. This will lead to some student dynamics. Okay, if I just make a rule that attributes points by reading presentations and PDFs in a course, so the student may only download everything in 5 minutes, get the points, and be bored with the course. So the teacher needs to be able to realize this and to change dynamics. Okay, add rules for point discussion, add competitions in the Moodle platform, for instance, and force behavioral change in the student, so it keeps getting engaged and it changes how the student necessarily feels when attending the course or attending the learning task. So this is a circular model. The objective is to optimize the learning experience with small modifications to the gamification dynamics and gamification elements implied in the game. So a more detailed description of the same model, you can see that the mechanics and the dynamics of players are intrinsically dependent from one another, and those two combined will develop emotions, cognitions in the student, and the student will respond differently for different gamification elements. So if you have a lot of ranking tasks, competition tasks, so students can become stressed for over competition. If you have more collaborative tasks which attributes points by open discussion threads, answer discussion threads from other students, then we'll promote more collaboration. So this is something that needs to be tailored to each group. Okay, and generally speaking, these gamification experiences are iterative and they can be changed edition over edition of a course, or if it's a long course, we can change it the change dynamics at the determined set points in time, set periods in time, to try to influence how students are responding to the gamification elements. Go. And also remember that there is no single answer for the best gamification course. It depends on the student population, and it depends on the characteristics of the student population. So if we have socializers, achievers, explorers, and other types of students, they will necessarily influence how the behaviors. They will necessarily influence each other, and well, we need to have gamification elements either to appetize everyone or to drive the students towards our end goal. For instance, if we have a course on socialization or how to cooperate with each other, we will need lots of gamification elements that promote those aspects. So in here we have a very nice summary of gamification elements by more tailored to each user type. So we can also use studies like this one as a reference to know what to implement in our courses when we have certain students, those types of students, and use this as a tool to enforce better learning outcomes and better dynamics within our course. So the teacher here has an important role. Okay, it is him who will coordinate all these efforts. It is him who will monitor and adjust course material, and of course it has to be aware of how students are interacting with resources. So this leads to another important topic, which is gamification analytics. And these gamification analytics are a way to monitor how students are using our gamification platform. So it can be as simple as point distributions or points over time per students, temporal statistics, game element states, feedback rate, user characteristics, and user logs. Okay, so every gamification implementation, plugins or others, has some type of analytics that the teacher should exploit and should use to its benefit. Other things that it can also make is to implement or define key performance indicators. Okay, indicators that the teacher needs to control to assess if the learning activity is being well learned or not. We can also use patterns based on KPIs for learning activities. Okay, if those are defined in the literature. We can use objective markers. For instance, if students are able to complete some task or some practical assignment, and we can also use dashboards to see in real time how all these metrics are evolving over time, and to see if we need more rapid or serious intervention to try to empower students or to increase the success of our gamification course. So we can also use this gamification analytics with the Moodle learning management system. We can use the two plugins, Level XP and Stash, and we can see, for instance, I have metrics how many items each player has. Okay, normally it will be a function of time versus exploring all the contents in the course, and of course level up its points, levels and achievements that the student has acquired over time, so it will give a rich dynamic there. So if we go to Kaggle, we have leaderboards, user scoring, submission dynamics, feedback, public and private leaderboards, and we can see it develop in real time. As students are submitting their answers, we are seeing and acknowledging their performance. And I would like to end with this presentation. I would like to focus that gamification is not, there is no unique approach to gamification. Gamification is by definition dynamic, and courses which implement gamification should be dynamic to tailor for the students. Okay, and I hope that with these tools, teachers can become aware of what they can do and what they need to do and when they need to do what they need to do to gamify existing courses or create new gamification content for distribution. So this concludes our presentation of Model 4, and thank you for listening and for participating.